This is Latter-day Presentations, where we discuss topics and issues of faith for Latter-day Saints. Let's talk today about healing versus destructive empathy. What is the difference between those two? And what does that look like in our life of faith as Latter-day Saints? Let's begin by looking at some examples from social media. Sometimes on social media, in conversations about choices that we and other people make, we're confronted with the reference to Mosiah 18, where people are told that part of Christian living involves a willingness to mourn with people who are mourning. And this passage is weaponized all the time in manipulative ways. It's used to beat people over the head and tell them that they're not empathetic enough. Let's look at some examples from social media. Here we have an article written by a guy who says that he abandoned his religion for his wife, and he received some criticism for writing what he wrote. And one of the commenters said, "Some of the dismissive comments here are frankly infuriating to me. What happened to mourning with those who mourn and comforting those who stand in need of comfort?" Here's another one from Twitter. "To all the Mormons, no matter who you voted for, you better uphold your baptismal covenant and mourn with those who mourn from here on out." And here's another one. "Good grief, read the room, lady. Also, you're failing miserably, your baptismal covenant, to mourn with those who mourn." Let's look at the logic of that kind of an accusation around empathy. So empathy as a religious accusation, it starts with a desire to shame a religious person. And then it proceeds to, religious people can be shamed by asserting that they do not measure up to their religious commitments. And the next step is, my personal notion of empathy is the one described in Scripture. That's something that we assume in this process. And finally, I'll use my scriptural notion of empathy to shame this religious person as deficient in their commitments or covenants. This is a very common pattern of thinking. It's the logical process behind using empathy as a club to beat other people over the head, people who we don't like. A word of caution about empathy. When balanced with true principles, empathy can be a source of healing for people who are struggling in life. When it is not balanced with true principles, empathy can become a sheep's clothing for a lot of destructive, enabling behaviors. Here's a book I highly recommend called Codependent Discipleship. And the authors say codependency is a type of dysfunctional helping relationship where one person supports or enables another person's drug addiction, alcoholism, gambling addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement by removing or fixing the consequences others experience. In its broadest definition, a codependent is someone who cannot function from their innate self, and whose thinking and behavior is instead organized around another person, or even a process or substance. Codependents often need broken people around them to feel value, and if they are not fixing other people, they will feel empty and without purpose. In a world of emotional littering, codependents are picking up the mess and carrying garbage bags overflowing with other people's problems. Unbridled empathy, or empathy that extends beyond experiencing vicariously, is a form of spiritual codependency. Spiritual codependency can also be the underlying influence that causes a few individuals to become allies, defenders, or propaganda machines in defense of those considered to be marginalized by, or who espouse practices and dogmas that oppose the church. For these few, it is not enough to empathize with people that experience hardships. They must become victims alongside them or for them. Rather than extend love and compassion to people who are hurting, unbridled empathy can cause individuals to crusade for or even attack others who are the perceived aggressors. In this, there is a key difference between being compassionate and empathetic with individuals who experience a variety of trials and supporting destructive paths and practices in the name of loving support. Now let's talk through some differences between good empathy or bad empathy. Good empathy does not participate in delusions. Bad empathy is willing to indulge people's delusions. Good empathy is honest. Bad empathy joins people in their dishonesty. Good empathy is empowering. Bad empathy only validates people's feelings. Good empathy helps to develop an internal locus of control, a sense that someone is empowered to make their own life better. Bad empathy reinforces an external locus of control, which is a pattern of thinking that suggests that my well-being is fully the product of other people's choices and circumstances that are external to me. Good empathy is motivated by desire for another's well-being. Bad empathy is motivated by a desire to seem compassionate. Good empathy is balanced with principles. Bad empathy has no principle higher than emotional gratification. Good empathy comes from abundance and wholeness. Bad empathy comes from neediness. Good empathy facilitates healing and growth. Bad empathy creates enablers and codependency. Let's talk through some examples. What are good and bad empathy in these situations, and what does it mean to mourn with those who mourn? What responses are truly oriented towards someone's well-being versus enabling self-destructive thinking and behaviors? Here are some examples. I'm hurting because I lost a loved one. I'm hurting because I want to be healthy, but I hate eating healthy food. I'm hurting because I'm addicted and I need my fix. I'm hurting because people have told me things I can't reconcile, and now I'm having a hard time trusting them. I'm hurting because I doubt, but I don't want to do the things other people have done that led to a return to faith. I'm hurting because other people don't treat me the way I think they should. Let's talk through some possible responses to these things. Let's talk through some healthy validating responses versus enabling responses. If somebody says, I'm hurting because I lost a loved one, that is not a situation that requires a lot of thinking through what is good or bad empathy. It's a very straightforward situation where we can just say, that is a hard experience. I can relate to that. Or I haven't experienced that, but it must be hard and I'm here for you. That's a good validating response. How about, I'm hurting because I want to be healthy, but I hate eating healthy food? A validating response would be to say, eating healthy is definitely a challenge. I can relate to that frustration, right? Here, I haven't lied to the person. I haven't misrepresented that life should be easier than it is, or that they are somehow free of responsibility for their own well-being. An enabling response would be to say, you shouldn't have to eat healthy food. How about, I'm hurting because I'm addicted and I need my fix? A validating response would be to say, addiction is really difficult. I'm sorry that is so hard. An enabling response would be to say, I can't bear to see your pain. Let me help you get another fix. How about, I'm hurting because people have told me things I can't reconcile, and now I'm having a hard time trusting them. A validating response would be to say, I'm sorry, I've been there. I hate that feeling. An enabling response would be to say, I'm sorry, that feeling of confusion means you've been lied to. Right? That's a situation where the person may not have been lied to. They just haven't seen appropriate ways of thinking through a confusing situation. But an enabler is always going to validate whatever a person's mindset is, whether that's a healthy or unhealthy mindset. Another one, I'm hurting because I doubt, but I don't want to do the things other people have done that led to a return to faith. A validating response would be, that's a tough situation to be in. I'm sorry for that frustration. An enabling response would be, you're not the problem. You shouldn't have to do anything that causes you discomfort. And finally, I'm hurting because other people don't treat me the way I think they should. A validating response would be, learning to work with people is really hard. I know that feeling. An enabling response would be to say, those people are wrong and you are entitled to better from them. So you can see this final enabling response validates a victim narrative and a sense of entitlement. That is a very destructive thing to do. But enablers, they do these kinds of things because it feels nice to them. And that's a hallmark of destructive empathy. It feels nice. Let's talk about cognitive behavior. In other words, just the ways that we think about things. Cognitive behavior therapy is designed to address cognitive distortions that contribute to mental and emotional suffering and increase interpersonal conflict. Validating someone's cognitive distortions contributes to a deterioration of their mental health. And destructive empathy involves validating people's cognitive distortions. Well, what are cognitive distortions? They're all or nothing thinking, jumping to conclusions, emotional reasoning, should, shouldn't, and mustn't statements, gratitude traps, blaming others, minimizing or mislabeling, and assuming the worst. Those are some broad categories of cognitive distortions, and there are others. So therapists who practice cognitive behavior therapy, they spend a lot of time trying to help people step away from these tendencies in terms of their thought patterns, because they're very self-destructive. But enablers are doing the opposite. They validate these thought patterns, and people become more miserable and their relationships become poisoned as a result. Now, in a gospel sense, my personal belief is that empathy is the basis for the oldest accusation. Satan, going back to references in the New Testament, he's called the accuser. And we're taught that he was accusing even in premortality. Well, what would he be accusing us of? And I covered this in my presentation on accusation. I recommend that one. But broadly speaking, my personal belief is that Satan in premortality presented himself as the great empath, the most empathetic of all of Heavenly Father's children. Not one soul will be lost if I'm put in charge, right? And the implicit accusation there is that, if a system is put in place that involves any soul being lost, then that's a less empathetic system than mine. Because how could anybody stand for that kind of an outcome, right? So again, I recommend my presentation on accusation where I dive into that in a little more depth. And finally, here are some more items of reading. In our day and age, empathy is often held up as being the supreme attribute or virtue. And empathy, it is absolutely true. Empathy is a gift that a lot of people have. But every gift that we have is also a challenge if it's not balanced with principles. And I hope that message comes through in this presentation. Thank you for joining me. This has been an episode of Latter-day Presentations. We would like to remind viewers that our channel represents our own views and not necessarily any official positions of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We hope this presentation has been informative. Our notes for this show are at Nauvoo Neighbor, and the link can be found in the show description. Also in the show description, we have a link to provide feedback. If you would like to suggest a topic for discussion, or if you would like to contribute a presentation on a topic of interest to you, let us know. Thanks again for joining us.